Welcome to season 4 of the Founders Only podcast, where we uncover the pivotal trials and triumphs and the stories of great founders delivering actionable advice on how to be the leader of the pack.
Today, I'm so excited to welcome Kyle Vamvouris, founder of Vouris, who leads an on-demand executive GTM team aiding B2B companies' scaling efforts. With a background in high-performance inside sales, Kyle champions data-driven strategies, empowering sales teams, and supporting founders to create success stories. He's renowned for his speaking engagement at major SaaS events and 3 best-selling books on B2B sales, one of which I have here, 16 Steps to Repeatable Sales. Kyle also offers personalized leadership training and sales coaching tailored to each company's individual needs. And outside of work, he's a dedicated father who enjoys photography, hiking, and strategy games, fueling his passion for creativity and strategic thinking. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today, Kyle.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. So we're just going to jump right in and start with, can you tell me the journey to becoming the founder of Vouris?
Absolutely. So really where it started, I would say, was with my first sales job. Sales is a fundamental skill set. And I often say I was pretending to go to college. So I was going to college, but I was mostly doing stand-up comedy. I ended up dropping out to do stand-up full time. And I got a job throughout the day selling gym memberships. So that was my first sales job. One of my bosses got hired at a company called Intuit, and he referred me there as an SDR cold calling. So eventually I ended up moving over to Intuit. I was an SDR for a while, an account executive. After that is when I wrote my first book called Cold to Committed. From there, I went and started leading teams. So I ran the sales development team at an early stage startup based out of San Francisco. I ran the inside sales team at a large software supply chain company. And when COVID happened, it was a pretty good time for me to venture off on my own and decided to start my company. I had done a little bit of consulting on and off, as a part-time thing here and there. And I decided to take it full time around COVID. So that's the short version.
Okay, so let's talk about who Kyle was before becoming an entrepreneur. So where did you grow up? What was your childhood, your high school life like? When did you kind of figure out what your passion or purpose was in life?
Yeah, look, I was a very passionate person always, I would say. So as a young man, like in high school and stuff, I just loved creating. So I was very involved in film production. I entered multiple different film competitions in high school, had a lot of fun doing that. I'm very passionate about that. I found theater at a young age. I started doing theater when third grade was the first play that I ever took seriously and had to audition for. And I was in theater all through high school. As sophomore year, I was in the most advanced theater class you can get into, and which was very uncommon for sophomores. It had only been done once before. And I love it. I love performing. I love the stage. I love theater. And I found stand-up comedy when I was 15 years old. And I had already I'd known about stand-up for a long time. I remember Brian Regan when I was in 5th grade, really inspired me to want to do comedy one day. But when I was 15, I got really into it. And I did my first stand-up at a comedy club at 17, because that's the youngest they would let you perform. And then I pursued it really aggressively later high school, but mostly early college. I spent probably about 5 years from the age of 17 to 22, really doing the best I could as a comedian.
And where are you from? What?
The San Francisco Bay Area. So I grew up around here. I was born in Jersey. We moved from Jersey to San Diego. We moved around a lot. So I lived in San Diego for a little bit. We lived in San Leandro, which is in the Bay Area. And then we hopped around a couple towns in the Bay Area. But I primarily grew up here. By the time I was 7, we were in the Bay Area.
So now I'm curious, since you said acting and stand-up is in your background, have you been able or have seen any parallels or I guess not parallels, but have you been able to leverage that experience in sales, building
Yeah, I would.
relationships and making people laugh and connecting on that
That is the
level?
most powerful. So being able to make people laugh, and I've often talked about this before, where if you can be fun to work with and incredibly competent, you'll do really well in your career. So like that's pre-entrepreneurship stuff. I'm very fun to work with. I joke around a lot. I'm pretty sharp. I'm witty. So we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of laughter. But I also am an incredibly hard worker, and I take my work very seriously. So that's a good mix to have when you're an employee. And especially me, like I get into stuff, if I'm working on something, it's what I'm working on. I'm excited about it. And nothing is more exciting to me than the first like 80% of something. So when I picked up photography, it was like a bunch of work trying to get to like 80% competency. The reality is it takes a decade to get to final 20%, that experience, right? That work. Same thing with comedy. Like you can get to the first 80% maybe pretty quickly, maybe in a couple of years, but to get to greatness, it takes, 10 years, 15 years, et cetera. And I think most things are like that. I love that first 80%. I also love the final 20%, but you don't have the time to do as many of those as you want. So I will acknowledge that I'm somebody who enjoys that 80%, and I'll jump around from thing to thing in order to experience it over and over again. And comedy, I probably went a little bit further than the 80%. But for a lot of my hobbies, I'll I'll do the 80%. So I don't know how I got there, but my whole point here is being interested in stuff, having a good sense of humor. Like these are all things that make you a more interesting and more fun person to be around. And generally you'll do pretty well in your career if you're fun to be around and you're really good at your work. So that helped me quite a bit. And that is rooted in comedy. You explore a lot of interests when you do comedy, and you're there to make people laugh. It's a big part of why you do it, So that's really, really helpful. It's helped throughout my whole career.
I feel like also the comedy in particular helps with listening skills, because
Yeah.
I feel like the greatest comedians are so observant, and they're constantly watching people, their mannerisms, how they react to things. And so I wonder if that's like really helped you be able to quickly kind of build rapport and practice some of those skills in conversations, sales conversations. And I guess what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get at and get your feedback on is like, do you think that how could a founder explore some of their quirks, if you will, or unique traits and skills and characteristics? Because what I'm finding is that building that rapport and that trust is so, so critical apart from the system, which we'll get into. But if you have a system and you don't have some confidence or some ability to really build that rapport and that trust, how successful can you really be in sales?
Yeah, and we all have those things, I think, already. So I think it's less about exploring parts of your personality, and it's more about showing those parts. There's I don't know, it's like an old Japanese anecdote that I've heard where everybody wears three masks. One is the mask that you show the world. The other is the mask that you only show your closest friends. And then the final is only the mask that you'll show yourself. And oftentimes we put a pretty big gap between that first and that second mask. And there's ways that we behave and we act around our friends that people really like about it. That's why they're our friends. I dealt with this for a really long time. I love to, crack jokes and like mess around with people. Like it's a core part of my personality. And for a long time, especially I got into leadership at a young age. So because of that, like I always felt like I had to put on this more executive presence and executive persona. And I probably carried that longer than I needed to. It probably was helpful at the time though. But I carried it for longer than I needed to. But this applies to everybody where you have this persona that you want, that you have this way you want to be perceived. And then there's people who know you really well. And you don't want other people to really perceive you that way, but there's enough good there, but it comes with a little bit of baggage. So you're scared to show it to everybody. I think really breaking through that is probably where a founder should focus, or anybody who's trying to build relationships, whether it be one-on-one or even to larger audiences.
So what's your superpower?
I would say I have a very, very good ability to understand where people are in a room. Not like physically, but like, are we feeling okay? Are we sad? Are we happy? Are we excited? And I have a really strong gauge on people's emotions. It's probably what I'm most skilled at. And it's very helpful when you run a team, or if you're in board, if you have to present to board or, board members and things like that. I have a really good ability to understand where people are at and how they're feeling in that moment. And if I'm on pace or if I'm not on pace. A lot of that probably comes from comedy. I would say like I'm pretty intuitive in general. And then in a comedic environment, when you're doing stand-up, you have to really understand where the audience is, and sometimes your audience will pull back, sometimes they'll pull forward, and knowing where they're at. Especially if you want to like turn around a show if something's not going well, which I've had happen several times. So I've kind of honed that skill. So that's probably one of them. And then otherwise it'd be, I would consider myself a very, very good speaker, and I'm very good off the cuff. I'm really, really strong with a little preparation. And that's a skill that took me, I've probably spent decades. I did Toastmasters when I was 9 years old. So I spent a lot of time doing like table topics and then improv when I was in high school. So that's probably my two like biggest superpowers.
Now, you're definitely going to have to tell me how you ended up in Toastmasters at 9.
My dad, my dad was an interesting character, and he brought me, him and I would go to seminars. Like I don't think I've ever been to a sports game with my dad. If I have been, it's because he was dragged to it. We never went to sports games. We never watched football, but he would take me to seminars. And he took me to Toastmasters when I was a kid. I gave a speech, like I said, at 9 years old. I gave a speech about playing basketball or something. But he would take me to seminars. So by the time I got out of high school, I mean, my dad and I had gone to a lot of seminars. And it started off, I was just watching it. I'd be at a seminar for real estate. I'd be at a seminar for marketing, like just random seminars. And at first it'd be just watching. And then my dad would start explaining to me, like, this person's starting to sell. Like, oh, this is called seeding. This is where you're referencing taking action before you get to the close. So that way the audience realizes that action is important to take. So when you ask them to take action, they're more likely to do it. Like, we would break down what they're doing in the talk, and then we would go and count people who ran to the back and try to figure out what the conversion on the event was. So anyway, but that was a big part of my life outside of school until I graduated high school. So I'd gone to so many seminars and seen so many speakers. I mean, my heroes were orators, folks like Jim Rohn, Tony Robbins, of course. Les Brown is probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite. All these greats, and those were my heroes. And watching them speak to these big audiences and how they were able to captivate the audience, how they were able to speak to that audience is something that really excites me to this day. There's nothing I love more than being on stage, whether it's a stand-up show or if I'm giving a talk at an event. I absolutely love every second of it. I love the walking up to I love the preparation. I love walking onto the stage. I love giving the presentation. I love afterwards. It's probably what I'm most passionate about. And it was very interesting growing up in that kind of environment.
Definitely. Was your dad an entrepreneur?
Yeah. My dad owned medical centers. So he is a chiropractor by trade. Ended up, I think he's owned 11 chiropractic clinics total, and he converted a few of them to medical centers. He ended up retiring early. He at a young age, like 45 or something, somewhere around there. Mostly because he was very into real estate as well. So any money he made from the clinics, he put into real estate, and yeah, so he was an entrepreneur. He spoke a little bit too. He dabbled in it, but it wasn't his primary thing.
Do you think that influence kind of in somewhere in your mind, you expected to build a business and be a founder at some point?
I think so. Like, I always had like little stuff I was working on, like I had a video marketing business when I was 20 where I would go and shoot videos for local businesses. So I always had a little bit of that in me for sure. It had to have come from, my dad. There's no doubt about that. So I think so. And yeah, I always felt, now that I really think about it, I always felt like I would eventually start something, but I was never in a rush to. I figured like, I'll start something when I get there. I'm not really in a rush. And I had done some side stuff while I was a sales rep and whatnot. And finally, when it came time, to start Vouris, then it felt very natural. I also had saved up a lot of money, because I started Vouris. I had 2 kids. I have 3 now, but I had 2 at the time. And my wife didn't work. So she stayed at home. Now she has a business where she does like balloon installation, so making balloon arches and garlands and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. So she does that now, but before she didn't. And I started the business. I didn't pay myself for 10 months. And I'd saved up enough money to be able to do that. I don't take debt. I'm not a debt person. So that was really helpful. So anyway, yeah, the timing ended up being really right, but I probably did get that desire to have my own business from my dad, and also didn't seem like something that was all that challenging to do. I just felt like I needed be in the right place to do it.
Okay. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about business and sales now. And so this has got to be one of the biggest questions that I hear at events or when I'm just in conversations with other founders, and that is about founder-led sales. And I
Yeah.
know how many of us, me included, have tried to get out of founder-led sales, albeit I'm sure too early. So I
Yeah.
want to ask you, like, when is the right time and what is the best approach to moving into founder-led sales?
So if you're venture backed, the right time is when you raise capital in order to do so. So I'll leave that sort of out of the equation there, because generally you're doing things not at the right time because you have the capital in
No.
order to do so. And there's a whole new layer of stress when that's introduced. Generally, you want to get out of founder led sales once you have some kind of process that they can follow in order to get new business. So that might be you're doing your own cold calling, you're doing a cold email campaign, you're reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and you know, like, hey, if I spend a full day just doing this stuff, I'll book one meeting. And then if you can then say, okay, if somebody else is doing that whole thing, can they book one meeting? Well, if they follow exactly what I'm doing, I'm not doing anything real special here. It's not like I'm using my network. Like, this is all cold stuff, or maybe it's inbound leads from paid ads, whatever it is. Great. This person's going to take over this workflow, because I know this workflow has some level of success to it. Of course, when somebody takes it over, there's going to be some growing pains there, but you work through those, but you know, at the foundational level that this is going to work to a degree. So that's typically the best time. The one asterisk I'll put here is I often will encourage founders to wait until they can hire 2 reps, because if they can hire 2 reps at once, it gives them a lot more flexibility, because if one rep's not performing well and the other is, and you're giving them both the same amount of support, it could be a rep issue. If they're both struggling, you know, it's more than just a rep issue, typically, right? If they're both doing really, really well, you know, you're probably onto something. It's really helpful to have those 2 people there for comparison purposes, but then also they compete, and having that team dynamic, I think, is really useful for salespeople.
I love that. I love that idea. I have not heard that one before, to hire 2 at the same time. So let's also just get a little bit more detail on this process. So what would you say, I'm not going to hold you to a specific number, but like, let's say 3 or 4 components that are essential in the process. So I think I've heard you say before, recording your calls, for example, having examples that people can actually listen to you close and explore discovery or do demo, that type of that part of the process. So, after the lead has been captured, or after the initial outreach has been done and that connection's been made. So besides that, or including that, what are some of the other key things? Like, if I were to make a checklist and be like, okay, I have a process, let me document this and get this actually systematized. What does that look like?
Yeah. So the first thing here is you need a list. If we're doing cold outbound, which is what most organizations start with, if we're doing cold outbound, we need a list of companies that we can sell to, and founders should spend 5x the amount of time and money making sure that that list is quality. It is an incredibly important company asset, but it's often not treated like that. They'll hire a rep and say, okay, now go make a list in Apollo and call them, or whatever tool they're using. And they don't have any success. And a big reason why, is because they're not owning the list like they should. So the first is the list. And early on, the list is the strategy. So being very intentional about what leads live in that list is incredibly important. And then I way oversimplify this stuff because it doesn't need to be complicated. You pick one channel. So let's say cold calls. And if you're hiring somebody, 100% it should be cold calls. It's the most effective channel, in my opinion. So let's say it's cold calls. Pick one channel and just start using that channel. As that channel starts working, then add a couple of other channels. But what a lot of folks do is they try to create a sequence right from the beginning. And they're like, okay, we're going to call a little bit, we're going to email, we're going to weave in LinkedIn, and we're going to do this beautiful orchestra of different touch points. It's like, calm down. You're trying to do a lot. Each one of those channels is different, has a different workflow. And it's also, you're hitting different people. Because if you take any given list, they're probably split up by thirds, where it's like a third of them will be people who answer the phone, a third of them will be people who reply to email, and a third of them will be people who reply to LinkedIn. Yeah. And some of those might overlap, some of them might not, who knows. But by just picking one channel allows you to optimize the workflow, which leads me right into the third thing here, which is workflow. So when we choose a channel, the question is, what does a person have to do on a daily basis in order to hit the number we want them to hit? And you generally work backwards. So you say, here's a number I need in order to have this function. And then I'll work backwards, figure out how many, this is the amount of revenue it needs to produce. How many deals do we need for that? How many meetings do I need in order to get those deals? And then how many cold calls do I have to make in order to talk to enough people to book enough meetings in order to hit that number? And you just work backwards. And let's say it's 100 cold calls a day. And you're like, great. And now I need somebody making 100 cold calls a day. That's all they're doing. And then to your point earlier, you're listening to the calls, you're giving them feedback, you're doing whatever you can to try to improve that rep's performance and get them to the benchmark. Once you understand, and this is very important, once you understand the relationship between the activities that happen and the outcomes you get, everything changes. That relationship is incredibly important. And the better you understand that relationship, the more scalable your process will be. Okay.
So just to be clear, if we're doing founder-led sales and you're recommending cold calling as, we're new startup and the founder, are you suggesting the founder should be making 100 calls a day, or how do we technically execute that? Because that's, I'm assuming, a lot of work. I have personally never made 100 calls a day. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you really recommend a founder integrate that in and test the quality of the system or the effectiveness of the system before they pass that off?
Yeah. So yeah, I would have a founder call. Look, it's fine if you have a business that's doing okay and you can afford to bring somebody on and have them do the testing by having them cold call. I'm not against that. It's just early on, generally what I find is that founders will do anything to not cold call. So what they'll do is they'll automate email campaigns, or they'll just randomly send a bunch of emails and then their deliverability will go, into the toilet. They'll try to message people on LinkedIn and then they'll end up getting restricted on LinkedIn or whatever. Like, they'll do anything to avoid cold calling. But what is the best possible thing you can do in order to get people to evaluate your solution or have conversations is to be there in person with them. If you go to a trade show or a conference, those are where you have your best conversations.
Absolutely.
Right? Well, what's right next to that? Speaking to them live on the phone. So that's what I would do. I would just talk to them on the phone. And it's so simple to do, but people feel a little uncomfortable doing it, which is why they don't. But the reality is it's not a hard skill to learn. It's pretty simple. But I think we just have a lot of blocks because we're like interrupting people's day and stuff. I get it, I get it. But it's also the most effective way, in my opinion. Unless you can go to an event every single day of the year, you got a cold call, in my opinion.
Yeah. So for me personally, I recently, after trying to get out of founder-led sales twice, I finally accepted that I have to get through this and document it fully and what had, and I uncovered now that my superpower is connecting with people one-on-one. And once they get a chance, at an event especially, I am like expert level networker.
I'm sure.
And so by doing that, I'm like, maybe I really should try to go, at least one event a week, but the more events, the better. And I wonder if I can, anyway.
It's tough. Well, no, I think you're on the right path here is because 100% you should do that. And as that's working, what I think you're going to find, it's going to be very difficult to be able to hire somebody to replace you in doing that. Because you just said it's your superpower. Getting somebody who's 80% good at that is actually pretty challenging, right? Because it is a unique skill set. Also, it's a very different experience when you're at an event talking to another founder versus you're at an event talking to a salesperson. It's just different, right?
Yep.
We try to pretend like it's not, but it doesn't matter how charming the salesperson is. There's still almost like a stink to it because you're still a salesperson. So you would be a great example where maybe you get to a place to where you're at the MRR you want to be at. You have a consistent way of generating business yourself by taking these, going to these conferences and having conversations with folks. And now you want to start building out something a bit more scalable. Maybe you get to a point, or maybe you're at that point where you hire an SDR to do cold calling, or you hire somebody to take the demos that you're booking when you go to events. And then you get that process working well. And then you get an SDR to plug in to find something that doesn't rely on you going to events to generate business. Like, that's how I would think about it. Every business is different. And even though I'm very passionate about cold calling, I'm more passionate about what works. And I take a very data-driven approach to that. And if a founder comes to me and their emails are working, I'm not going to try to make them cold call. No. We need to double down on email. It's clearly working for you. But the biggest or the most common story I hear is we're sending a bunch of emails, nobody's replying to them. How do I get them to reply to it? And the reality is email is very hard. LinkedIn is very hard. Cold calling is very hard. But man, talking to somebody on a cold call gives me the best chance. If I can just hit them on the phone, if I can meet them at a conference, that gives me the best chance versus them reading an email that's static, not as good of a chance I'm getting. So anyway, that's how I feel about it.
Totally agree. Totally. Now, I've heard you talk about this next question before, but it was just so many golden nuggets in it that I want to ask you again so our listeners can benefit from it. So how do you approach goal setting with sales teams in a way that gets them fired up and really gets their full buy-in to the results and the outcome that you want, but still making sure that those targets are realistic? And just before I stop talking, what I wanted to get to or get at that you've mentioned before is that process of connecting the sales person's personal income goals to quotas.
Yeah. So generally your salespeople are going to be compensated based on the amount of business that they do. And the quota is going to be a big part of that. And sometimes it makes sense to have accelerators. Typically I like accelerators. And what those are is as you hit higher quota attainment numbers, so 110%, 120%, you make more per deal that you close. I think those are very useful and I love them, but sometimes it's a little too complicated when you're building out your first program. So it doesn't make sense to do it. But anyway, let me share with you a little bit on how I like setting like quarterly targets or monthly targets for sales reps. I do something a little unconventional. I bring the salespeople in on that process. And what I do leading up to that meeting is I figure out what we want to hit. And I do all of the work to figure out what it's going to take to hit it. And is that realistic? So I know the numbers already that I want the goals to be, but I want my team to like these numbers. I don't want to just give them the number. So what I do with the team is I go bottoms up. So generally I go top down. What's the number we're trying to hit? And then our close rate is X and our dial to connect rate is Y, right? I do the math and figure out how many activities a day we need to do to hit it. With the team, I'll go bottom up and say like, okay, well, why don't we try to figure out like how many activities are you guys confident that you can make on a daily basis? And then we'll talk about it. Well, what percentage of people answer the phone? What percentage of the people, when you talk to them on the phone, actually book a meeting or whatever the channel is, email, et cetera. So that we have these conversations and we come to a goal together as a team. And what you'll find if you're doing this right is that generally the sales team's number will be a little higher than your own. And then you're in good shape. Because then you can go and look at their numbers and say, well, hey, let's give ourselves a little wiggle room here. And let's lower this percentage just in case we don't hit this percentage. And then you sort of get to the number that you wanted to get. I've never had a situation where their number was dramatically lower, but I'm very careful about the numbers that we're setting for a team. I'm not arbitrarily raising quota just because the company needs to hit more in revenue. I have a model that I'm using to figure out how much I should expect from each sales rep. And if I want more revenue, then I'm going to need to hire more sales reps or figure out a way to increase the efficiency of my existing team. That's fine too. But just to like make a number higher just because it doesn't really make sense to me. And I don't like to build teams that way.
I have a wild card question for
Cool.
you. How much do you, how do I say this? What are the key points of alignment, especially as the buyer's journey has changed and the buyer psychology has changed so much very recently online? What are the key points of alignment between marketing and sales nowadays?
So it depends on how the company is structured. Generally, there is a handoff point between marketing and sales. And that handoff point needs to be very objective and very clear to everybody. So if the marketing team's goal is to drive MQLs, there's going to be an MQL number. And there's also going to be a conversion rate or a qualification rate of those MQLs. So usually you have marketing qualified lead and then sales qualified lead. And we agree on what those need to be. So if we're looking at all of the metrics, so like one of the big debates is, hey, marketing is getting all of these MQLs, but only 30% of them are qualified. If that's baked into our math, that's fine. Yeah, we're only expecting 30% to be qualified. If you guys are able to make that higher, if marketing makes that higher, that's actually gravy for us. And of course, you're going to work to improve the percentage of leads that are qualified. But at a high level, you build out the math based on what the reality looks like on the ground. And that becomes harder earlier on as you're making some assumptions there. But over time, you start getting a little bit of experience. You go, okay, look, we need 100 MQLs a month because 30% of them are actually sales qualified. And then the sales team can't complain that they're only 30% of the leads are qualified because that's what we're expecting them to be, right? And we know that of those, we're going to be able to get a hold of, whatever, let's say 10 out of those 30 people. And then of the 10, we're going to close 8 of them. All right, great. Those are our numbers. And then now you start playing with it and you can say, hey, marketing, let's take a look at all of our lead sources. Which ones have the highest MQL to SQL rate? Hey, can we double down on those a little bit more? Oh, webinars do well. Why don't we do more webinars and see what that does? And then maybe there's a world where we're dramatically increasing our top line revenue because we've done so much optimization at the top of the funnel. That's generally how I would try to approach these things. And what I find the most friction between sales and marketing comes when those metrics aren't clearly discussed, agreed upon, or understood.
What about in terms of sales enablement from marketing? How much do you think it needs to be documented, or the expectations should be clear to both departments on what marketing needs to provide to sales to help them close more deals?
So this is a leadership conversation, first of all. So your sales team says, hey, we have a lot of customers that ask us for case studies like these, and we just don't have one of these types of case studies. Maybe it's a specific use case. Okay, great. The sales leader needs to work with the marketing leader and say, hey, we have these, we have 8 case studies, but we actually don't have one that covers this use case. Can we build one? And then we hold the leader of those people, right, for probably the founder at this point, should be holding that team, that group accountable to creating the material that their sales team needs. And why are we doing that? And then who's incentivized? The sales leader is incentivized, because if we have that case study, presumably, which is why the whole conversation got brought up, we're going to increase our close rates.
Correct.
So the sales leader is incentivized to work with marketing to get the case study done. And that's a really important piece. But if there's not trust between the leaders, that becomes more challenging. And if they're not being enabled by their leader, so maybe the founder, maybe there's a CRO, then it becomes even more challenging because there's no above authority that can make sure that the marketing person actually does what the sales leader needs them to do to be enabled. So that's how I think about these things. The data sets everyone free. And I talk about data a lot because it gives you full visibility into where we're doing well, where we might be struggling. And then all of our conversations are around what can we do to improve this specific metric? And if we need to leverage marketing in order to do that, that's totally fine. because ultimately at the end of the day, marketing's still a revenue number, right? How much revenue did came from marketing efforts, right?
Exactly.
Either a lot did or a little did, and they're still somewhat incentivized, but sometimes we get so far away, the metrics, we don't fully understand the relationship between what marketing is doing and then what the revenue is doing, that it's hard for us to make the argument to the marketing leader that creating that case study is going to drive more revenue that's attributed to marketing, because they're just so far. They're like, hey, I get to the MQL and I'm done. So anyway, the data really sets us free in that regard.
And that's why it's so important that there is a shared conversation between those departments on what their goals are, what they're, how they're pacing on a constant, ideally weekly or more basis, right? So that
Totally.
they can see easily like, okay, sales is not hitting their numbers and marketing is hitting these metrics that we have, these vanity metrics that we have. So that's why it's so important for leadership to make sure that the metrics that are being, that the teams are being held to are aligned with each other so that they can easily have that conversation and handoff, right? So that
Right.
perfectly segues me into my next question about data. So how can founders leverage data effectively to pinpoint those areas of improvement and optimize their sales team performance, in addition to what you said and what I'm hoping you'll speak to that I've also heard you talk about before is, some of these really good tracking spreadsheets and what they kind of include.
Yeah, totally. So we talked a little bit about the marketing stuff. So let me just talk specifically for the sales function, and I'll include outbound in this too. So again, remember, the important thing is that we have a strong relationship between activities and outcomes. What does that look like? Understanding that relationship, what does that look like? So let's say we're looking at an outbound team. We have the number of activities that are being done. So that's the cold calls, cold emails, cold LinkedIn message, whatever it is. From that, we have an engagement, a number of engaged people, someone who replied to an email, who answered their phone, replied on LinkedIn. There's a percentage there. So let me use cold calling as an example. If you call a random cold list off of Zoom info, the dial to connect rate, so you make a call, the percent time they answer the phone, is going to be 5 to 6%. That's pretty standard on a cold list. So in this case, our engagement percentage for dial to connect is going to be 5 to 6%. From there, when we connect to somebody, then we either book a meeting or we don't. That's a percentage. What percentage of the time when we speak to someone do we actually book a meeting? And then what percentage of the time does that meeting show up? So you look at those numbers, and if it's email, it's the number of emails that get sent. It's the number of people who open those emails. It's the number of people who replied to those emails. It's a percentage of those replies that were meetings that got booked than the meetings that showed up. So each channel has their version of this. You look at all of that, what it allows you to do is say, hey, what metric could be better? And maybe in that example for cold calling, we want to get that 6% to a 10%, because that'll have a dramatic impact on the amount of meetings that were booked. Great. That's where we would focus. And we do whatever we can to improve that number. And then you start going beyond that first meeting. So the first meeting, they show up for it. What percentage of them drop off between meeting 1 and 2? What about between meeting 2 and 3? What about 3 to 4 or 4 to close 1, right? Understanding the percentage that are dropping off stage by stage, because you're going to do the exact same thing that we just did on the outbound side. We're going to look at the pipeline and we're going to say, okay, where's our biggest drop off? All right, it's between deal stage 1 and deal stage 2. Do we expect it to be as big as it is? Can we make it better? Okay, if it's going to always be low, then what's the next best one, right? You start to figure out, you create a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you repeat that process over and over and over again, and then you actually start having a real systematized sales process.
Got it. So like, what is one test that you've seen be used a lot in B2B?
A test?
Yeah, like give me an example of a test with a hypothesis.
Oh yeah, like something that they're testing. Yeah, so let's talk about deal stage 1 to deal stage 2. Let's say we have a really large drop off, like 70% of deals are dropping off between deal stage 1 and deal stage 2. So we all sit down as an executive team, we listen to calls and we say why, right? Or maybe just a sales leader would do this, but if it's a smaller team, it's probably going to be everybody. And we listen to a bunch of calls and we go, okay, what do we think is happening here? And let's say we're starting to come up with some hypotheses here. Maybe one is, hey, we're not doing a great job booking the next call on the first call with that person. Okay, well, that could be something we could implement. The other one, we're not talking to enough decision makers. We're talking to like managers, and we need to be talking to their bosses. That we can either fix from the front end by making sure that we're only booking meeting with the right people, or we can do a better job navigating to that person from that first call. Okay, maybe that's another one. Maybe they're just not qualified, and there's some problem earlier on where the qualification is not where it needs to be. So we can look at those and say, all right, well, here are the 3 things that we found. Which one is most likely the problem here? It's like, all right, well, it seems like we're not really talking to the right amount of people. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the lists here, and we're not going to call managers anymore. We're only going to call the CMOs. All right, perfect. Let's do that, and let's see what happens. And then what might happen is the amount of meetings that we book drop, but the quality is a lot higher, and it makes it worth it. Or it's not worth it. And instead, we need to be focused on that first call, how we enable that manager to be a champion and help get us to the CMO. Then you would test that out, right? So those are like 2 examples of how you might solve that one thing.
Got it. Okay, so now pivoting a little bit, and then we're going to come back to Vouris specifically. So what is one or a few tips that you have to build trust earlier in the sales process? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I think that if you're doing founder-led sales, it's always to your benefit to try to reduce the sales cycle and the length, the sales cycle and the number of calls as much as possible. So what do you have any tips for how to build that? Just some better ways to solidify the relationship earlier on, that not only to build trust in person to person, but also some trust in the brand and solution.
Well, case studies and testimonials are the big one, right? You need as many of those as you can get. But then also distributing those. So what I find is a lot of times we'll have some of these assets, but we'll never use them, or we'll use them pretty infrequently. So here's one thing that I recommend everybody do. A meeting will get booked for, let's say, a Wednesday. I recommend having emails going out before that Wednesday meeting. So maybe on Monday and then on Tuesday, that are a piece of content that helps them solve a problem that they have. That might be you walking through your solution at a high level, so they can kind of get an idea before they get on there. And then they come to the call. They have some sense of what you guys do. Preferably those are videos where the person who's delivering that is also the one doing the demo. So I'll have sales reps create these in some cases. And then you do that first meeting, and then afterwards they get more content. Now, of course, the sales rep or the founder is going to send a follow-up email. They're going to have another call on the calendar. But making sure that anybody who books a meeting has some like real good content leading up to and then post that meeting has always been really helpful for building familiarity. It almost doesn't matter where the prospect has seen you, as long as they've seen you before, it seems. Now, of course, if they see you speak, you're gonna have so much more authority than if they only saw you on a video. But I mean, I have people that saw me on a YouTube video nowhere else. They don't even know I speak anywhere. And they'll tell me that they feel like they're talking to like a YouTube person right now, and which is silly, but there's just some aura there, and having any pre-exposure to who they're going to be speaking to helps them build a connection, but then also gives them confidence, assuming that we're talking about how to solve a problem that they and the solution they're providing is actually going to solve that problem. So that's one of the things I highly recommend doing.
Totally. Yes. What has been the primary marketing channel or the most recent effective marketing channel for Vouris, and what led you to choose it?
So the best one for us is we do a weekly live class. So this is probably our best marketing thing. I mean, we have partnerships with some folks, and we're very active in SaaS Academy. But as far as like straight marketing, our weekly live classes are phenomenal. And what those are, it's kind of, everyone wants to do a webinar to try to like get business. And I think those are great. Our webinars are these live classes where they're very structured. They're incredibly actionable. And anybody who goes to one of them, they come out of it like, I have something I can just use right now or tomorrow, and that's something I'm very, very passionate about. We don't do a hardcore pitch. for them to sign up for, anything. It's not like it's a secret sales call. I'm genuinely giving our best information. We do it every single week for free, and people can sign up for it, whatever they want. And we have someone will sponsor it, and we'll give, some lead magnet and stuff, but this isn't like a big sales thing. It is genuinely trying to provide the best content we possibly can. We track NPS on it. We do surveys of people who attend it. It's something we take very seriously. We have, it depends on the topic, but let's say roughly 200 people will register for them every single week. About 60% of the people who show up are first time viewers of the live class. So we get a pretty healthy mix between repeat visitors and first time visitors. And we generally 30 to 35% of the people who register will actually show up live. And, ranges. Sometimes we'll have near 100 people. Sometimes we'll have 30 people. The topics really range, but that's how we do it. And it works really well for us.
And so this is fully live. Like, this is not a recorded call.
Nope. And we used to have 13 topics that we would recycle. And then recently we wanted to make like a big improvement to it. So now every week we're doing a new topic, and my CMO and I, we spend 2 hours on Mondays creating the framework or the template or whatever we're going to be giving out on one of the future live classes, building out the deck content, and then it goes to the team to actually create the material. But yeah, each one is live and each one's unique. It's about 20 to 30 minutes of content depending on the topic. And then the rest is Q&A, which is one of the parts that people like the most.
That's great. That's great. One more question about that. Where or how are you promoting the live class, or where are you finding the biggest source of registrants?
So there's two things that we do primarily to promote the live class. We send to our email list, we send 2 promotional emails per week. Excuse me. Those promotional emails are for the class coming up on Thursday. Like, for example, today we sent a promo email for Thursday's class that's coming up. On, I think, Tuesday, we'll send another promo email for that Thursday class as well. So the list, and we have 7,500 people in our list. It's not big, but our open rates are really good. We have like 40%, 50% open rates on our email blasts. So they're getting promo from there. Then we also do it. We just added a second one, so I'll pretend like we've been doing it that way the whole time. But we'll do one hand raiser post on LinkedIn. I have a pretty strong following on LinkedIn, so we'll do one hand raiser post on LinkedIn talking about it, usually on Friday or Thursday. I think it's the first one we do. And then on Monday, we do another one. And what that is, this topic's important. If you want to go to the live class, comment yes below, and then we'll send you the details. Then we reach out to them, say, they say yes, we DM them, say, hey, give us your email, we'll put you on the invite. And we're very early to tracking this metric, but it seems like about half, maybe 40% of our attendees, so not registrants, attendees come from LinkedIn. Registrants are a lot less, but it seems like the LinkedIn people show up at a higher rate. I don't know. That's a very new metric, so I'm not too sure how that'll shape up over the next couple of months.
Are you recording these and making them available in some way?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. So I do not share the recording afterwards. And the reason why is because I believe it hurts our show up rate. That being said, we just added to the process where they're recorded. And the way we have it structured, we cut the front end out and we cut the back end out, and it's almost like a little YouTube video. So we'll post them on YouTube, but it happens at a very different time. So it's not like you can go there the next day and it's on YouTube. It's going to be a couple weeks out, but that's what we are adding as of now. I think our first one just got posted that we did that way, but I did not send the recordings out to people.
That's awesome. That's really smart to leverage it for short form content. I mean, you're filming it, you're doing all this work for it. Might as well use it for short form content. Okay. So what is one book, podcast, or resource that has profoundly impacted your mindset as an entrepreneur?
Buddha's Brain is probably my favorite book around mindset. It's a book about it's really interesting. It talks about the neuroscience behind a lot of mindfulness practices that you can find in the East. And I really, that book was really powerful for me. So I highly recommend it to anybody.
Have you implemented, like, do you do mindfulness meditation or anything like
I
that
do.
on a regular basis?
Yeah, yeah, I'm a bit woo-woo, so I do a lot of that kind of stuff. I would say more of that stuff is recent. I've been much better about it recently than I was after I read that book. I read that book maybe 8 years ago. It had a big impact on me, and I tried to do meditation and that type of stuff, and it didn't really stick. And then, over the past 8 months, I've become much better at it.
And what do you think is the number one tip for that? Like, how did you go? What happened that caused you to really implement that on a level of consistency with it?
I would say, sometimes, let me think of the best way to answer this. I feel like for a lot of things, the consistency comes first, especially as an entrepreneur, where we're like, oh, we need to do this activity. So we need to be very consistent with it. We need to post a video once a week. We need to do a podcast every single week. We need to post on Instagram every day. And we do the consistency before something clicks inside us that drives us to want that consistency. We do it because we know we should. We don't do it because we need to or we want to. There's an interesting, we don't talk about wants all that much, right? And that's probably more of what I'm talking about here is, are you going to post on Instagram every single day? Yes. Why? Because I want to get more business. Do you want to post on Instagram every single day? No. Then I don't know why we're doing it. Just because we want more. But there's a lot of ways to get business without posting on Instagram. I know some people making a fortune who post zero things online. Hell, my wife's business does pretty well, and she doesn't get any business from social media. It's all like from Google because she has reviews online. So it's like it's like a weird thing that we trap ourselves into. And as entrepreneurs, I've talked about this several times. The favorite topic of mine, but I feel like we get caught up in this belief system that life is a journey. We're on a journey. Life's a journey. And it sounds really positive when we say it. But I'm not sure if that's true because journeys have destinations. And anybody who's really worked hard to accomplish goals knows exactly what happens when you get near them. You move the goal every single time. Yeah. And it's like, at what point do we finally just say, all right, I think I might have an issue here? And I heard this, I'm blanking on who I got this from, so this isn't my quote, but life isn't a journey, it's more like a music thing. And we're supposed to dance while the music is playing. But we get so caught up in the journey and the outcomes that we forget to dance. And what triggered this 8 months ago or whatever, I started getting more consistent with this stuff, is I finally decided to dance a little bit. And I'm somebody who historically has really beat myself up. Most entrepreneurs do. You need to be doing more. You need to be doing more. There's another level. And I don't subscribe to that anymore. And I'm much more happy because of it. I've disconnected myself from the outcome. My self-worth doesn't come from my business. And with that freedom comes the want to just sit and meditate. Call it meditation, but just sit. Can I just sit? Can I close my eyes and just sit? Can I observe my thoughts? Are my emotions me? Or am I something observing an emotion? We say like, oh, my anxiety is really bad. Your anxiety? Or are you just experiencing some anxiety right now? Two totally different things, right? But anyway, so in this case, and I don't think this is always, like I think consistency coming before the want sometimes is necessary. But in this case, the want came, and I really try to encourage, I talk about this sometimes, I try to encourage entrepreneurs, and I'm early in my journey, right? Vouris has been around almost 4 years here, so I'm still early. But I've talked to people who have been in business for decades, and it took them decades to figure out that they are not their achievements. And if you can do that earlier, I think it's better. I feel like I could be sitting here in the exact same spot with you without having suffered as much as I let myself suffer. That wasn't necessary. It wasn't a prerequisite. One of my favorite quotes is, and this is an adaptation from like a passage in, I think it's called the Bhagavad Gita. It's like ancient Hindu text, where it says, make joy and sorrow the same, and then a bunch of other examples, and fight just for the sake of fighting. And that was like in a war context, but in general, I think there's a powerful message there where we shouldn't have to, we try to trick ourselves to experience an emotion to drive an action when we can just act without the emotion. But we feel like we need the emotion in order to act. And then we get addicted to it. You know, I work out every single morning because I'm the kind of person who works out. And do I like it? No, but I'm that type of person who pushes through things that I don't like. Really? Why can't you just like it? Why can't you just work out? Why do you have to dislike it? Why do you have to like it to do it? Couldn't you just do it? The answer is yes. But we get so wrapped up because our whole lives we're used to like getting the emotion to do the thing. And I think it's a little hack that we've used on ourselves for a very long time. And there's a way to do it without all of the suffering that comes with that.
So basically, just get it done, separate the emotion from the activity.
Yeah, separate yourself from the outcome as well. Like we don't know what the outcome's actually going to be. We try to pretend like we do, but we don't. So why are we worried about the outcome? Just do in the moment what feels like the right thing to do. Have goals, want to get to certain places, but don't freak out about it. Don't try to change everything. I think of it almost like a river where like we're in the stream. You can either focus on like moving to the left and moving to the right for the log to come to you, or you could try to swim upstream to get to the log. Eventually, you'll get to the log in both scenarios. But in one scenario, you're going to be tired because you were paddling so fast. You know, you were moving back with the current. So that's kind of how I think about it, is just focus on the actions that are required to get to the outcome that you want to get. Focus less on these tangible outcomes and focus more on becoming the person that you need to be in order to experience that type of thing.
That's the word, becoming. The word is becoming, enjoying the process of becoming.
That's right.
There's one thing I wanted to leave with you about this, that, you know, I've been a founder with creative analytics for almost 20 years. Next year will be my 20-year anniversary.
Congrats. That's awesome.
And thank you. And it took me until last October to get to that place where I stopped focusing on the chase. And what happened for me was I went to my first Tony Robbins event.
Oh, cool.
And he had us unpack those limiting beliefs, which I didn't even know that I had.
Yeah.
And what the exercise was that we had to come up with 3 limiting beliefs. And the first limiting belief that I came up with, which I had never said to myself or out loud thoughtfully, it just came to me as I was writing down a limiting belief, was I don't deserve to be happy. Didn't know that I was telling myself that semi-consciously or unconsciously. And of course, you know, we went through the process of understanding that the antithesis of your limiting belief is usually the truth. Yeah. And what I unpacked was that I deserve to be content. And what's the difference between happiness and content? Well, happiness is fleeting. It's an emotion that you're constantly chasing because you get happiness and then you need more happiness, and whatever that dopamine rush is or that thing is that you're chasing that brings you that happiness, you keep chasing it. And that goal, sometimes it's the actual process for founders of moving that goal. That's like a dopamine hit or something of, oh, I have a new goal. Okay, I have this new thing, this new challenge, this new thing I can do. And if you just sit in that contentment, which is long-term, in that gratefulness and the gratitude, and that is, you know, as you're meditating and doing those things, focusing on, okay, what are all the things that I've accomplished? What are all the things that I've done this week? What are all the things that I'm grateful for that I have? And this one little thing that I, you know, want to accomplish, right? Rather than really need to accomplish, like how really big is that in the grand scheme of things, of all the things that I've accomplished? And if I sit in that gratitude and acknowledge all the things that I've already accomplished, then how small does it make that new goal, right? And the confidence even of knowing that you can achieve it, you know? So,
Yeah, totally. And Tony's so good at that too, with like adding the gratitude element there, because I do think that's a really important piece of it, is being grateful for everything you have, everything that you've experienced, and everything that's happening right now. And oftentimes, at least for me, for a long time, I'll speak for myself. I was my head was always in the future. I rarely think of the past, never to this day. Like I just don't think of the past, which for a lot of people who do think of the past a lot, think that's a blessing, and I think it is. Because
yeah.
I don't hold on to a lot of stuff, but
Me
man,
neither.
did I hold on to the future. And the
Mhm.
future is something I don't even know if that's what it's going to be. Right, the
Right.
past already happened, and I'm totally fine letting go of that stuff. The present is right here, right now. That's the only thing that's actually real. And then
Right.
there's the future. And it's like, I got to get there. I got to get there. Get there. I just lived so much in the future. And the future is not a great place to live, because when parts of that future become reality, they get to the past a lot quicker. And that's just, I don't know. It's
Living the
sad. It's
present.
sad how much you miss out on because you're so focused on the next thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you on social? Can you give us your actual handles?
Yeah, so almost everywhere, I think I'm Kyle Vamvouris. I'm a very unique name. Everyone will be able to find me.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
website, Vouris.com, that'll have everything on the bottom of it too.
And you're on LinkedIn, Instagram.
LinkedIn, Instagram, and I'm on X as well. And I think it's the same handle there too. We have a YouTube channel that's awesome. And then a ton of resources on our website too, all for free, which is awesome.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.